Welcome back to Climate Matters. I'm Edie Lush. We're going to turn now to another topic that probably affects several of Anouka's 10 points towards net zero. It isn't specifically any of them, but that's the concept of circular economy. And to discuss that with us, Head of Sustainability at Reliance Industries, Mitika Bajpai. Thank you for coming. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
So let's start with the basics. What is a circular economy and how does it connect with averting disastrous climate change?
Right. So I think the circular economy concept has been around and has been defined by multiple different parties world over. I think what I find interesting about it is it's talking about how a linear system is moving towards a circular system. It's not about using and discarding. It is about what can you do with that resource such that it is better utilized, right? And the whole concept of sustainability is that we don't, we think of the 7 generations before us and the 7 generations after us. So the whole idea of circularity is sort of embodied and very seamlessly integrated within this whole concept, which is why I find it as a very good solution moving forward. To simply explain what the idea of circular economy is, it's talking about managing waste. What are you doing at the end of life of your product or any resource in that context? How are you best utilizing that resource, right? Is that the best use of that particular resource? Is it the right way for you to discard your phone by the end of the year and get a new one just because a new phone has launched? Or does the phone survive? Can you repurpose it, refurbish it, bring it back to life and use it for longer? That's the second bit. And the last bit, which I found very interesting about the whole circular economy, is regeneration. And I think that's the missing piece. Anouka touched upon it with nature-based solutions a little earlier. It's about what do we do with the biogenic waste? What are we doing with the organic waste? How is that an important narrative as a resource that we're moving forward with?
Really interesting. So Anouka, weigh in. How would a more circular economy relate to your 10 points?
Well, it's across actually probably most of them because point one, not of the plan, but of what I'm saying, is actually we need critical materials and minerals to make all of these things. So to build wind turbines, to build the electric cars that we've been talking about, and those are finite sources. So it's actually really important to how we actually get the material for these things. But one thing I would just challenge Mitika on is actually if you want to buy a new phone, I'm quite relaxed about it. You buy a new phone. But as you said, don't just chuck it away because someone can do something with it and take the parts out of it. And I think that's quite important. And I think that's been a theme throughout our discussion today, which is how do we ensure people live their lives, get the best products, but we're also kind of making them cheaper because we are not having to mine for new things in bizarre places that we are having to try and find.
Or go into space and mine asteroids, which I know sadly we're not going to get discussing. But tell us what you actually do, Mitika, to create a more circular economics at Reliance.
Right. So at Reliance, we're looking at 2 aspects of circularity, and I think everyone world over is looking at 2 aspects of circularity. One is the context of emissions, and we briefly discussed the net zero commitments earlier, and of course we touched upon that as well earlier in the segment. So net zero is a whole ambitious target. I think Reliance has talked about committing to net carbon zero by 2035, which is significantly ahead of the Indian commitments and world over. So that's one aspect of circularity, and I think the circular carbon economy is a very important factor in here. But I also think materials plays the other aspect, right? So circular materials economy is an important aspect. So say for example, Reliance has been recycling 2 billion PET bottles for nearly a decade now, and we've increased that recycling capacity to a 5 billion PET bottle capacity. And what we are doing with that is creating new products, so bringing back life into what would otherwise be a discarded product. So it could be in the form of textiles, it's in the form of utilizing pyrolysis oil, it's in the form of an under layer of so-called plastic under your roads. right? Making that sturdy, and in India that's quite a bit of a challenge with potholes. So yes, there's lots of ways you can bring it back to life, but that's what I like about the whole circular carbon economy. It's going beyond the 3 R's, right? It's not just reduce, reuse, recycle anymore. It's about remove. What are we removing from, how are we removing carbon? Because carbon is a valuable feedstock, right? How are we bringing it back to life and how are we deriving value out of it? That's one. How are we sharing resources, right? How are we best utilizing the integrated sort of refinery in this context, or any manufacturing unit? Are we repurposing catalysts? Are we deriving the maximum value out of what would otherwise be considered as a waste material? How can we partner with, say, cement industries and make sure that what is one industry's waste is another industry's feedstock? How do we repurpose rice husk in the agricultural belt and derive energy out of it? I think the moment you eliminate the idea of waste from a linear economy,
Of course, it isn't exactly new. I mean, before we were able to throw things away, when you go, look at ancient cultures, there's very little that got thrown away. It's only in the last 150 years that it's become such an huge problem. What's the biggest challenge? You mentioned a whole number of ideas once you start thinking about getting rid of waste. What's the biggest sort of challenge as you seek to incorporate this idea of circular economics?
I think the biggest challenge world over is waste segregation. How do you streamline an informal economy like that of waste? I think is a challenge everyone world over is grappling with. That also leads to mixed waste, segregation. Where is it landing up? Is landfill the right way to go forward with it? Is incineration the right way to go forward with it? So I think
it's not, is it? But how do we change that? Because every time I go to throw something away, I think, where is this going? Is it really being recycled?
Right. So I think there are lots of interesting ways to look at it. I think you have formal systems that are setting up, and I think we have a few people here that have also managed to derive value from a broken system, like that of waste management, and in fact some of them also working with us at Reliance here. Once you have a formal collection channel, the problem is solved.
Okay.
For the people that don't have a formal collection channel, what are the minor changes they can make at home? Because as much as I hate putting the ownership on the consumer in this context, we need to understand the role we play in the entire value chain, where is the waste getting created, right? So another whole way of looking at it is to change the entire system. I think what Patagonia has done, for example, is pretty brilliant.
Phenomenal.
Absolutely amazing. I think that's a whole new way of working. I think the shared economy resources. I think in India there's this whole wedding industry of renting a lehenga, right? I think that's fascinating. It's incredible. Having textiles being leased out, or having garments be leased out, is a completely different way of working. And I think with the new generation, with the millennials adopting it that way, I think it's moving away from minimalism to new economic models like this. So I'm looking forward to that bit. But I think waste segregation as a challenge, I think formalizing the waste collection aspect is one thing, but also how are we changing business models to surpass these inefficiencies, these challenges, and where we are throwing our waste ultimately. And I also think, again, the organic waste has a very important story to play here. And I think it's important for us to regenerate our soil while we are also extracting the waste from that soil, right? I think it's important to put back the nitrogen and phosphorus we're getting out of the soil. So it's very important for us to compost. It's very important for us to start thinking of what we are doing with the organic waste and how we want to consciously segregate it. And I think that's a very consumer-driven behavior, and that's why I kind of feel like I feel like I have more power in making this choice. There are lots of my friends that are sort of zero waste influencers on Instagram, and you see that it's not just a one-off thing. People are actually driving change in the way they live life, being able to compost at home, being able to fertilize at home. Anyone who has a vegetable garden will change things, maybe hopefully have a zero waste wedding. Let's see.
Really interesting. Anouka, weigh in on what you've heard from Mitika.
A few bits. Like, I love the point that you just made, Edie, which is like, actually we've been doing it for ages. But then that also means, well, it shouldn't be that hard to to do it, right? I think you might need to get over that trust barrier and
Right.
trust when it goes into, as Mitika says, the kind of formal system. But actually, part of one of the 10 points is carbon capture, utilization and storage. That is what the CCUS stands for. And I think that utilization point is a really interesting one. People are making things all that, like, you know, there are new companies starting up all the time about that utilization point. So can you make bricks from it? Can you make clothes from it? Can you make diamonds from it? Like, these are all really interesting uses for it. And I think part of it is our attitudes towards it needs to be, oh, that's really cool. I want one of those reuse things. And we can also, you know, recycle it into kind of synthetic fuels. Like, that should be kind of part of the answer for aviation, which is, you know, getting some of that carbon from the air and then reusing it into fuels. So I think it's kind of all really exciting, and there is a tech piece to it, but there is also an individual piece.
Really interesting. What's the one thing you would like people to do more of, Mitika?
I think what I call it at a personal level is a sustainability audit or a lifestyle audit. I think if you just ask yourself questions about where this is coming from, what is going to happen to this after I utilize it, I think a lot changes. Just ask a question before you interact with the resource before. And I think on a personal level, that changes a lot.
Really interesting. Well, thank you very much to you, Mitika, and also to you, Anouka. We'll allow you to unvelcro yourself, unglue yourself from the chair. It's been a real delight for me to be with you here in the studio for Climate Matters. And we'll be over to Mark Barton with his leadership table quite shortly.
Thank you.